Hello, it's great to be back in Pittsburgh. So we've already heard a little bit about Flint today, or actually last night as well. And as you know, Flint is probably the most emblematic environmental and public health disaster of this young century. Flint is a story of what happens when the very people responsible for keeping us safe, for protecting our public health, care more about money and power than they do about us or our children. But the story of Flint is more than just about Flint. It goes beyond Flint. What Flint teaches us are lessons about the deeper crises we are facing right now in our nation. A breakdown in democracy, disintegration of critical infrastructure due to inequality and austerity, environmental injustice that disproportionately impacts the poor and the Black, a disrespect for science, for scientific truth, and an abandonment for our civic responsibility, our deep obligation as human beings to care and provide for each other. That's a lot of badness. But I think what Flint teaches us the most is, and what reminds us, is how intimately connected our environment is with our health, our public health. So it was just over the last few centuries, fairly recently, that governments became involved in protecting the health of their citizens. So as a field of science, public health rose up with our cities during the Industrial Revolution. So coal and wood polluted the air. Human waste ran through the streets. Running water was very rare, and sewers were even rarer. So when I think of that time, I think of one of my favorite public health pioneers, Jon Snow. Who's heard of Jon Snow? Not the Game of Thrones Jon Snow. So Jon Snow. So Jon Snow was a physician. He was a father of the field of epidemiology. He was an anesthesiologist. He was like kind of a jack of all trades. And he stubbornly used science and persistence to prove that the cholera epidemics that were raging through London were not caused by something called miasma, which was the common belief. And it was believed that it was the stinky air of London that caused the spread of these cholera epidemics. So he went against the status quo with science, with persistence, and he proved that it was actually contaminated water that was spreading cholera. And what he did, his actions in the very early days of public health, set drinking water standards throughout really the world. And when I also think about that time, I think about Charles Dickens. And we have, if you could pull up the first slide. So Charles Dickens was obviously a novelist, but he was also a social critic. He was a child advocate who always had his eyes wide open to the dark alleys of the Industrial Revolution. And he always kept children at the core of his stories, the most innocent. So he said in Great Expectations, "In the little world in which children have their existence, there is nothing so finely perceived and so finely felt." Can you actually put that slide back on? Sorry. So finely felt as injustice. It may be only small injustice that the child can be exposed to, but the child is small and its world is small. And the feelings of children are as vulnerable as their health. And the injustices during Dickens' time played out over a lifetime. So the average life expectancy of a London upper-class gentleman at that time was 45 years old. The average life expectancy of a tradesman was 25 years old. And a member of the working poor was 16 years of age. Of the recorded deaths at that time, over 60% were children under the age of 5. So urban environments are obviously less lethal now. We've come a long way. But in some ways, not much has changed. The environments of the cities that we live in, the dirt, the air, the violence, the hopelessness, the stress, the water, still predict how long we will live. Literally, the number of minutes allotted to us in our lives. Next slide, please. So I want you to meet Lily. So Lily is a little girl who just came to clinic. So my real job is I'm a pediatrician. I don't go around and talk. So Lily is a little girl that just came to clinic for her 4-year checkup. And I asked her what she wanted to be when, my first question was, how old are you? I'm like, Lily, how old are you? And she is one of those kids that absolutely shouts her age. I'm 4! I'm like, okay, great. And then another pediatrician favorite question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, Lily, what do you want to be when you grow up? She's like, I want to be 5. I'm like, that's awesome. But Lily knows something. She knows that every year is an achievement. Even before our water crisis, kids in Flint were struggling with every disparity that you can think of. We were in crisis for decades of disinvestment, unemployment, racism, poverty, violence, population loss, crumbling schools, almost everything you can think of. Flint is one of those places, like many in this country, where the zip code that you are born in is the greatest predictor of where you will end up. Children in Flint actually live 15 years less than children in a neighboring zip code. 15 years. Every year is an achievement. So after playing around, and she took my stethoscope and she tried to listen to her knees and do all these fun, silly things that we love as pediatricians, Lily's mom turned to me with an all too familiar look, a look of fear, anxiety, guilt, and she asked me, is she going to be okay? Is she going to be okay? I think I get asked this question almost every day. Is she going to be okay? They thought the water was fine. They were told the water was fine. I mean, why wouldn't the water be fine? It's America, right? The richest country in the history of the world. It is the 21st century. This is not, the cholera epidemics of the 19th century. It is Michigan. Any Michiganders in the audience? All right, there's few. So those of us from Michigan, we hold up our hand. We are the mitten state because we are surrounded by what? Water. So Michigan is literally surrounded by the Great Lakes, which happen to be the largest source of fresh water in the world. All right? And Flint, Michigan is right here. It's literally smack dab in the middle of the largest source of fresh water in the world. But despite all this, we have people and we have laws and we have regulations to make sure, right, that when we turn on our tap, the water is okay, right? Yeah, I mean, of course. So what do I tell Lily's mom when she asked me, is she going to be okay? Do I tell her that for almost her entire life, she has been drinking lead-tainted water? Do I tell her about the science of lead, that it is a potent, irreversible neurotoxin? Do I tell her that it erodes cognition and twists behavior, alters a child's entire life course trajectory? Do I tell us now that incredible science has taught us that there is no safe level of lead? Do I tell her that every single agency that was supposed to protect her failed and looked the other way? Do I tell her that she was poisoned by policy? So you obviously have heard about the Flint water crisis. Next slide. And you've seen pictures like these, and I'm sure you remember them. Yesterday was actually our 4-year anniversary of our water switch. 4 years. 4 years, and the people of Flint are still on filtered and bottled water. And at first you saw this, you're like, this can't be true. This must be like Photoshopped, like iced tea or pop poured through here. This is fake news. How can this be? How did this happen? So the story is that, Flint was taken over by the state. We were under financial emergency management. The only goal was austerity, to save money, no matter what the cost. And we stopped getting water from the Great Lakes, and we started getting water from our local Flint River. However, the water wasn't being treated properly. It was missing an important ingredient called corrosion control. It's necessary, mandatory ingredient. I think of it like a medicine that you put in the water to prevent whatever's in the pipes from corroding out. And without this ingredient, our water was 19 times more corrosive than the water from the Great Lakes. General Motors, which was born in Flint, stopped using this water because it was corroding their engine parts. Yet the people of Flint were told to relax, that everything was okay. Jesse Jackson called Flint a crime scene. Michael Moore, who is from Flint, called it not an accident, called it a racial crisis that wouldn't have happened in a richer or a whiter city. If we stop believing that government can protect our public welfare, our public health, what do we have left? Who are we as a society? But there is another side of Flint, and there is another story to share, a story that needs to be shared, a lesson that needs to be learned, and that's why I'm here today. Flint is also a story about how we came together and how we fought back, about how we resisted. And that means all of us has within us a piece of the answer. No matter who we are, what we do, or where we came from, whether our ancestors have been in this country for generations or, like me and my family, came here as immigrants, fleeing oppression, looking for a better life. It was mentioned yesterday, but we may have all come here on different ships, but we are all in the same boat. And we have the power to fix things. We can open one another's eyes to the problems that are often unseen, problems that we don't want to see. And we can work together, just as all of you courageously are, to create a better, a safer world where all children can develop without obstacles and barriers, without poisoned water or callousness toward their dreams. So to this day in Flint, we are still on filters and bottled water, and we are rapidly replacing our lead pipes. We'll only be the third city in the country that's replaced our lead pipes. You guys need to work on that as well. But we have rolled up our sleeves, and we are building a model public health program for our kids. We are leaning on the incredible and emerging science of brain development and resilience to wrap our kids with everything we know to tip the scale to promote their development, because we owe it to these children. And that means for every child like Lily, who is raised in a toxic environment or an unraveling community, there is hope. And sometimes I say I'm writing prescriptions for hope, because the routine work of pediatrics is not enough for kids in Flint or Pittsburgh. These kids need so much more to get an even shot at the rest of their lives. And when we know about their environment, about their air and their water and the economics and the poverty and all these things that impact children's health, then we can treat them in a more holistic way. And our prescriptions for hope are real things. They're not just words, they're tangible things. They're evidence-based interventions. So we have put into place things like home visiting programs and high-quality childcare. We have 500 brand new childcare slots, high-quality early childcare, free all year, where kids get 2/3 of their nutrition. We have a near universal preschool. We have a huge expansion of early literacy programs, school health services, trauma-informed care, mental health care, mobile grocery stores, and more. And we're also working on the bigger things that you're also working on: economic development, restorative justice, participatory democracy. So I want to be able to tell Lily's mom and every mom that comes in that after they ask, is she going to be okay, that they are going to be more than okay because of the work that we are doing to tip the scales. And this is another way that we can all come together and be a piece of the answer, not just for Flint and places like Flint, but for children anywhere who bear the brunt of life's hardest blows and live with poverty and violence and hopelessness, all toxic environments. And just as a child can learn to be resilient, so can a family, so can a neighborhood, so can a community, so can a city, and so can a country. A country can endure trauma and neglect and once again be a place where people are cared for, a place where democracy and opportunity and justice are restored. And that is where healing begins. Thank you.